A record 141 women will serve in the 117th Congress. Female Republican candidates were the driving force behind the increase. At least 36 GOP women will hold seats this January. That's an increase from 22 in the outgoing session and up from the record of 30 in 2006, according to the Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers University. 17 of them are newly elected to the House, with one race still pending. Several of these lawmakers say they are hoping to counteract the so-called squad. That's a group of vocal progressives in the House, including Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. These incoming Republicans say their goal is to counteract what they see as a rise in socialism. Nicole Malliotakis is one of those women. She is the congresswoman-elect for New York's 11th Congressional District, serving Staten Island and South Brooklyn, and she joins me now. Congresswoman-elect, welcome.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
So why do you believe your district went back to Republicans?
Well, here in New York City, we have seen how far left our government has gone, whether it be embracing the defund the police movement, whether it be these mandated closures and restrictions that many people feel are hurting our economy and detrimental to industries like our restaurant industry, and whether it be many of the policies that have been put in place by either the state legislature or the city council, like the bail laws that have made us less safe. People came out in droves to send a message from everyone from the congressional delegation to Mayor de Blasio to Governor Cuomo. And people are truly concerned about what's happening in the city and believe that we need to have two-party representation in order to have a balance.
Well, your opponent, Max Rose, was the first Democrat to represent Staten Island in Congress in about a decade, flipping the seat 2 years ago. Now he's considering running for New York City mayor, something you did in 2017. What do you think of his potential run?
Look, what makes this country so great is that anyone who feels that they have something to contribute can have that ability to run for office. When I ran for mayor, I spoke about the fiscal issues facing our nation and our local economy here in New York City. I talked about how the mayor was really dismantling everything that he had touched. And despite spending more money, we were getting less in terms of results. We were seeing our quality of life decrease. And everything that I had pointed out at that time has only exacerbated since then. And we really need a strong candidate for mayor, and we're hoping that more will emerge on the field that can be productive in the conversation of how do we get New York City's economy back on track following this pandemic? How do we make New York City safe and support our NYPD and give them the resources they need to drive down the crime rates? And how do we address this issue of property taxes skyrocketing under Mayor de Blasio? I had put forth a proposal to cap property taxes, to also keep spending steady. As you know, this mayor has increased spending significantly during his time, which has certainly put a lot of pressure on the taxpayers. But the worst part of it all is that despite all this increased spending, there aren't results. Things have not gotten better. So we do need a mayor who's going to come in, and I don't know who that candidate will be, but we do need a candidate who's going to address all those issues.
You mentioned the pandemic. Staten Island has experienced the largest coronavirus outbreak in New York City, with a 7-day positive average nearly a full percentage higher than the next closest borough. And you've also been a vocal opponent against the governor's shutdown of indoor dining, citing the governor's own data, which show less than 1.5% of all traceable cases come from restaurants. Representative-elect, what do you think needs to be done to stop the spread?
Well, first of all, if you look at the statistics of what the contact tracers have been able to identify, it's that a majority of these cases are becoming positive in the home. That means people are going home, perhaps not knowing that they have this virus. And when you're home, you're lax, you're with your family, you're with your loved ones, you may be taking off your mask, you're not socially spreading or being as cautious as you would out in the community. And so I think it's very important for people to understand that that spread is taking place in living rooms. So that way they understand that they need to take more precaution and be more vigilant when they're at home. Perhaps you don't dine in the same room with your loved one if they're feeling that they may have symptoms, and make sure they get tested. And if they are positive, you got to make sure that they're quarantining in a separate room and that there's some type of barrier. Or wear your masks when you're around them. Look, when I'm with my parents, I wear my mask. I eat in a separate room because they are vulnerable and they are elderly. And I want to take that extra precaution. So people just need to have this information so they can make important decisions for themselves and their loved ones. The fact that the governor is focusing on restaurants where you're only seeing a 1.43% infection rate, shutting down an entire industry, is only going to drive more people to now congregate and hang out, perhaps invite people over to their homes where we are actually seeing the spread. So I'm concerned about that, and I think this is really about educating the public about what their options are. We know more about this virus now than we did 6 months ago. This week, thankfully, we started administering the vaccination to our most vulnerable and the frontline workers, and we're going to continue that process. But of course, we need people to practice the safety measures put in place by CDC to protect ourselves and our loved ones. But no, I do not agree with the governor shutting down an entire industry and putting thousands of people out of work, particularly when the metrics show that that's not the cause of the spread.
I want to ask you about a local story that has developed in your district. You have vocally supported small business owners and law enforcement, and a centerpiece of your campaign was your opposition to calls to defund the police. Knowing all that, I want to ask you about the case of Daniel Presty, the manager of Max Public House in your district. He's accused of hitting a sheriff's deputy with his car while evading arrest after he broke coronavirus guidelines. More than 400 constituents have signed a letter on StatenIslandLive.com asking you to condemn his behavior. They're fearful, they say, that his actions threaten their lives as well as those of New York's police officers. What's your response to that?
I actually have addressed that incident a couple of times, and I thank you for also asking me about it because it was very tragic. What occurred that evening. And obviously, we are a community that respects and supports our law enforcement. I did speak with that deputy shortly after that incident. He was in good spirits. He was in pain. What we have to understand here is that these deputies, these sheriffs, are being put in this position by Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio, who have now made them target small business owners. Certainly, there's no excuse for what occurred that evening, and there's an investigation underway, and everything that occurred that night will be heard in a court of law. But I want to also make sure that this doesn't take away the focus from thousands of small businesses, particularly restaurants, across our city that are struggling, that are on the brink of closure. I have written to Nancy Pelosi. I have said that we have to pass the PPP funding. There's already allocated funds there for already approved businesses, and it can't actually be distributed until they pass a simple bill that just changes the date to allow them to continue to issue those PPP funds. We have a governor and a mayor who are sending law enforcement. They're sending agencies, whether it's the city agencies, whether it's the state liquor authority, into these establishments. They are being harassed. They are being fined. And in many ways, they're being extorted for funding. That is a major problem. We cannot accept that as a community. So I encourage people to continue to speak out against these arbitrary restrictions that have been put in place by Governor Cuomo and make sure that their voices are heard. Because again, we need a balanced approach. And we can't just shut down our entire economy, particularly in the days leading up to Christmas. So many families are suffering as a result.
Finally, we mentioned off the top that you are one of a record number of women who will be serving in Congress here. What does that mean to you? I'm just curious about your own sort of personal perspective when you think about that. And also, what do you think it means to be a Republican woman, especially now, in the time that we're in? Does diversity matter in politics?
Well, it's very important that we have a Congress that reflects America. And for this year, I'm very proud of the freshman class that is coming to Congress, and that we reflect America. We have African Americans and Asian Americans and Hispanic Americans and the record number of women just in the Republican class alone. So this is, I think, a very important historical moment for the Republican Party. I've known that our party has always been a big tent party, but now we're ensuring that those individuals like me, daughter of Cuban and Greek immigrants, Hispanic woman, I'm also the only Republican woman here in New York City, has a seat at the table because I have a different perspective. I have different ideas. And I think it's important that those ideas are heard. I don't share the same values as somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And when we saw so many women of the socialist persuasion getting elected in 2018, I think that encouraged a lot of Republican conservative-minded women to also decide to run for Congress so their voices are represented as well. So that's what we're here to do. We're here to fight for our communities. We care about a strong economy. We care about preserving freedoms and liberties. We care about preserving the American dream for future generations. We care about free enterprise. We care about the free market. We care about a strong restoring American jobs lost during the pandemic, and of course, overcoming this pandemic once and for all. So we're going to work together to do that. And again, this shouldn't be this should absolutely be a bipartisan issue. All those issues that I've mentioned are ones that Democrats and Republicans can make sure that we work together on. And I think it should be bipartisan to shut out socialism in this nation.
All right, we have to leave it there. Congresswoman-elect Nicole Malliotakis, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.